The low level of water caused by the recent drought has exposed some stones at the riverbed, whose appearances in history are meant for those people to get ready for troubles when these droughts come. They're known as hunger stones. So when the water level goes below these stones and they're fully exposed, they were chosen to record past water levels. And here's the thing that scared me. The stones that are unearthed there, the watermark goes down to 1616. And it reads, "When you see me, cry."
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. I'm your host, David DuByne, creator of the Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube. Wow, what a week it's been. If you have not noticed the uptick in the weather, the climate, the crops, the heat, the cold, the typhoons, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the volcanoes, I hope you're getting better news sources because that's all that's dominating the news at the moment. If you're being wrapped into the politics, that's all part of the play to distract you as we get into these higher food prices. Higher food prices are the name of the game. This is what the governments want to prevent you from finding out about because it affects our entire society. So as we move forward, what you're seeing is just a small microcosm of the changes that are going to happen. I wanted to run down a bunch of news today along with what's happening over in China, a little bit of economy, cryptocurrency, overlapping into all the weather changes we're seeing. There's an enormous amount of reports coming out now with crop yields, etc. Down, 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 lowest, down, down. Everything is down except for soybeans. So when you're seeing prices per ton jumping 5% in a day for wheat, for example, these are the types of things that are going to affect you later on in the year with food pricing. I'm going to run through a bunch of resources today with you. I wanted to cover the climate, some of the economy, how the media is spinning things now to explain more sea ice. Hey, it's normal now. And just a gamut of other things that intertwine into a web of what this reality is that they're trying to bend or make you create in your mind to reflect the outer world. There needs to be massive changes coming up to try to control how people react on the planet as their food prices double, triple, quadruple, or there's just unavailability of it. First, interesting, 2 typhoons are combining over Japan. First time that's happened in such a long time where actually 2 typhoons combine into one over Hokkaido Island, right where they had the record snow on August 17th. Never recorded that early. First time ever recorded in more than 300 years of snow on August 17th. The earliest snow they ever had recorded in the last 300, it was actually 312 years, if you want to be exact, was August 20th. And they had 125 locations in Hokkaido Island that had frost on August 17th as well. Now, taking a look at other strange atmospheric compression weirdness that's happening on the planet. Did you see snow in Saudi Arabia? It was confirmed to be hail, but when you look at the videos coming across the media, it looks like there were some flakes of snow within the hail. Even a bunch of hail bounced up and people picked it up with their hands on the road and also bouncing into the cars when they rolled down their windows. It was really small, like pea-sized hail. But it really looked like flakes were coming down because the hailstones were dropping much faster than what was floating through the air, such as flakes. Now, this is in the northwest quadrant of Saudi Arabia. They had the record snow there last year as well. They had snow in 2014, which hadn't been reported in more than like 90 or 98 years, something like this in that same area, for the extreme of it, where the depth was that deep. But anyway, you have snow slash confirmed hail in areas that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be thunderstorms in Saudi Arabia dropping, 5-6 inches of hail in the desert at that time. That's strange. So we got massive floods going on across the planet, as would be expected with these changes in the jet stream you're seeing. Now, I did want to come over to a couple other sites as we're moving through, and I want to tell you a personal thing here. I see a lot of news articles and I read a lot of entries. I do an enormous amount of scrubbing of the internet every day. I read a lot. Rarely will I get spooked where the hair will stand up when I read an article. It's happened, I could say, 2 or 3 times that I can actually remember. One of the ones was they talked about an 80% loss in the wheat crop due to the blizzard. That kind of was like, whoa, that's real. That was this year, by the way, so the wheat harvest. Crop yields, we're having a serious problem on this planet with wheat at the moment. It's down minimum 5% globally as confirmed at the moment. But, as they harvest it and put it in the silos, it's going to decrease from there when we get the real accounts on the ground. But here's the story. I read this and the hair on my neck actually stood up when I read this article here. Central European drought reveals ancient hunger stones in the Elbe River. Now, this is over in the Czech Republic, and you can find this article on sot.net. Actually, you can find it on physics.org as well. So what it is a giant stone, the hunger stone. The low level of water caused by the recent drought has exposed some stones at the riverbed, whose appearances in history are meant for those people to get ready for troubles when these droughts come. They're known as hunger stones. So when the water level goes below these stones and they're fully exposed, they were chosen to record past water levels. The stones that are unearthed there, the watermark goes down to 1616. And it reads, "When you see me, cry." The implications of somebody at that time writing that on a stone that won't be exposed for 400 years under the river, and the amount of trauma and migration and pure death that went on during the Madrid Minimum, when they lost 25% of the global population due to crop yield declines, plagues that came through when people didn't have enough food, they became sick, their immune systems became weak, the economic collapses, and the population migrations. These are kind of the fingerprint of the Grand Solar Minimum anyway. So if you want to think about it in an all-encompassing format, it's only 3 things to think about. The Grand Solar Minimum will have an effect on the crops, the crop yields, and how much money you're going to pay for food. Secondly, that will in turn have an effect on the economy because you will pay more money for your food. And when you do, you'll stop spending in the greater economy, and that'll pull away from the spending economy, which will have a downturn in all these other industries. We saw a light version of this in 2008 and 9. And finally, we'll see population migration. Because when it's too cold, there's no jobs, or the economy's crashed, and just power grids go down. People are going to leave. So those are the fingerprints of the Grand Solar Minimum. Think about it just like this. Now, when you have this 1616 stone up here, "When you see me, cry," yeah, that's a heavy statement. And here we are. It's visible again. And not only is the water level way below the rock's completely dry and the water's way below the rock, is what it's saying. So what they did is they put the dates that were significant droughts, 1842, 1840s, 1616, and they do have a 1921 there, Mark, as well. But where the water level was or is, they put a mark on the rock. They actually chiseled a line in the rock where the water level got to at the low levels for the water. Now that water is completely, as I'll say it again, below the rock, and below the rock's actually dried out sand. So the water level's even lower than that. They'll have to put a new rock in place somewhere down there. They'll probably get a bigger rock and put it in place and say, that is the great change, the civilization reset button of 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22. This has stark implications. You realize that is a breadbasket area for Europe. So it's not that it's just the Czech Republic that's dry. All that grain growing area in there in the Balkans, all the grain growing area that Russia has, that's all dry. Their grain yields are down as well. Australia, you talked about the drought in Australia, massive drought, more drought than has been recorded in the last 100 years. So the grain yields out of Australia are going to be, well, non-existent, shall we say. These are the same areas that were pegged that I'd done some research just showing repeating climate cycles of drought and wet by looking at stalactites, lake core drilling, because they can see the pollen when they drill down in the lakes. So you can see what kind of either massive plant growth during the time, because you're getting all kind of pollen in the air because there's more plants, which means there's more water. Or they get less pollen in the mud, where it means that there were less plants because there was less water. So actually, the pollen makes layers within the mud as well. So they can see what types of plants and how many plants were prolific at that time. And when we come and take a look at the droughts, you can go back in time and see that Australia is on tap to go into a mega drought. This will be just the first year of approximately a 7 to 8 year mega drought in Australia, and then it'll flip over into massive flooding. Now, in the west part of Australia, it's going to get drier. The south part of Australia is going to get drier, and then the whole east coast is going to start getting wetter. And once you start to look at the world and you can find reports on different areas, they start to map out where you can get a good calculation. The last grand solar minimum, what happened with the climate? Did it rain more? Did it rain less? And then you just look at today's world and say, are they growing food there? And if it got wetter, you can expect delayed planting or, fungal problems in the soil and the plants. If it got drier, we can expect the same thing, droughts, less yield coming out. And it's just about doing research and putting the points together on the map. Christian at Ice Age Farmer is taking a good lead on doing the crop losses. So I thought I would also jump in on the crop loss debacle today as well. So Christian's new report out here, Ice Age Farmer Report, Earth passing a tipping point. As the media would explain, a fiery hothouse into oblivion. Well, the hothouse is finished, and that heat wave was only for a month. So as the global temperature goes for the entire year, with the winter far below normal, the summer average or above normal for 1 month, you have to wonder what those other 11 months of below normal temperatures will do for the entire global total. So Christian analyzes what's going on with the droughts and the heat in some areas, the flooding in others. And he is talking about harvests are going to be early. They're going to have to harvest early by 1 month. And they're looking at 100% crop losses in Bulgaria. So when you saw that same stone coming up in the Czech Republic, they're in the same neighborhood over in Europe.
And since I have been talking about our need moving forward in this new society that we're entering as our global grain production starts to be reduced in yield, your food prices are going to skyrocket. And I mean skyrocket, not just doubling or tripling, something like 5 or 10 times higher by 2020 at the very least. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. They've been around since 1974, heirloom and organic seeds. Since I've started talking about them in my videos, I have a lot of people write and say that they've previously ordered, that they know the owner, having great results, good customer service. They quite enjoyed the seed quality as well. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. And we know the benefits of microgreens. All you have to do is use a search engine and look up vitamin, mineral, nutrient content of microgreens. You'll be shocked. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at trueleafmarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. And not only that, they have wheatgrass and grain seeds. So when I'm talking about grain growing regions going offline, we just need to look back in history and see where across the planet there was difficulty growing grains when this grand solar minimum intensified and the jet stream started wandering just like they're doing today due to a decreased magnetosphere that does not hold our jet streams locked in their traditional flows. Grains are one thing, herb seeds are another, cover crops, something different, but whatever you do, organic seeds are going to be a necessity because you can save those seeds and then grow them the next season, which you unequivocally cannot do with GMO. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Big freeze. Nearly a foot of hail falls in Colorado as well. Mount Bueller, 30 centimeters. That's a foot of snow in August. They say it's almost they do say it's the most in 14 years, unprecedented for the resorts. Yet it's a resort, so they don't have very many records going back to, give a good indication on this. So it's the most they ever recorded up there in 14 years of this resort being open. So what happened 200 years ago? Mount Bueller's in Australia. And one thing I don't get here is also they're talking about the snow. Now, they don't go into the latest or the earliest or something like this. It's just, hey, this is what was recorded. But it doesn't talk about the dates, which is kind of an important thing now. Because the dates of these snows, specifically in Japan, if you would have told me, hey, it snowed 3 inches in Japan on a mountain in August, I would have said, oh, that's interesting. But see, putting it into the context of it, it's the earliest it ever snowed in August, ever recorded, ever. That's a huge difference than just saying, hey, it snowed on August 17th in Japan. The context of the frequency of the event or the early or the late dates on this adds a huge, huge indicator into, is it a rare event? Is it unusual? What's happening? And a whole nother complexity comes into this. I want to come back to another drought article here. This is over on strangesounds.org. I'm trying to weave in that crying stone in the Czech Republic on the riverbank. Well, here we go. A Native American city of the Etsinoans was unearthed in Arkansas City due to, you got it, drought. It seems that now one of the largest prehistoric Native American towns in the United States that hasn't been seen since the 1600s, but was once home to 20,000 Native Americans, is suddenly visible due to a drought. This is the same thing that they saw over in Europe because of the drought that's happening there. A lot of the cairns, more foundations of forts, castles, structures. Stonehenge is the most famous, but they found a whole nother henge due to the drought. So when people were flying over in their airplanes, you can't be way up flying at 30,000 feet and see this. They're flying at lower altitudes, but what they found in the droughts in the UK specifically was the droughts are unearthing an enormous amount of ruins that people haven't seen or even knew existed before. Now, what is the chance that we're starting to see this globally, everywhere, that there's a repeat in history coming up where we're finding the ruins? Here they're finding something from the 17th century, Spanish cannon buried that they just found due to, the drought that's happening. If it was happening in one place globally, I would say that is a one-off. But when we're getting droughts on the 400-year pattern starting right now, it's showing the trend of what would be expected in the intensification of this grand solar minimum. The new grand solar minimum is termed the Eddy Grand Solar Minimum, EDDY, named for Jack Eddy, who did an enormous amount of study on cycles of the sun, the same repeating ebbs and flows of energy coming out of our star that give us abundant harvests or lean harvests globally. Also talking about droughts and floods, I want to come into the Ring of Fire. Because as we also talk about indicators for this grand solar minimum, the indicators are the uptick in volcanic activity and an uptick in earthquakes. They just had a new 3.2 earthquake directly in the middle of the new Madrid Fault Zone, the center of the center of the center of the new Madrid Fault Zone at epic 0 point. Just had an earthquake there. Small. But they didn't have a quake there in, well, at that exact spot in 200 years. Along the New Madrid, they've had a few smaller ones due to apparently fracking that's going on in that region. Got to go down to Missouri, Oklahoma. The Ring of Fire are heating up. The huge quake up in Alaska. And you got to realize that was in an oil drilling area, and they normally don't get quakes up there because there's what's called a capstone on top. There's called a cap. That's what locks the natural gas and the oil in there. It locks it on top. There's no fault zones. If there was a fault zone, all the gas would escape. So when you have oil and natural gas, they're looking for those capstones because seismologically non-active areas, there could be a capstone there that's not fractured. So when you go into the oil and gas drilling, they're looking for those areas. So when you have a huge earthquake above 5 up there, and I even did a full video on that, when it came to 6.5 on the magnitude in that oil drilling area, the chances of that were like 1/20th, or it was, 1/5 of 1% of a possibility of a 6.5 earthquake happening in that area. You got to realize less than 1/4 of 1% was the statistical possibility of that happening, and then they had a 6.5 off there. Now you just saw the 7.0 plus happening in Venezuela, which the USGS downgraded. Of course they would. They don't want to show a trend in uptick in larger earthquake activity. But the Ring of Fire seems to be heating up. But you got to realize that Cascadia mountain range, when we come into these grand solar minimums, not one of the volcanoes awakes, but several awake at the same time.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.